Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. I'm just coming in after spending some time outside in my backyard, raking some leaves, pulling up some bamboo, and cutting down some trees. It reminded me of one of my favorite characters. This character is very curious, and he's always getting into trouble. So why don't you come join me today as I do another read aloud, brought to you by Miss Reichley. Come on. There's nothing better than coming in and sitting in your favorite red chair with your favorite book. You wiped off the sunscreen lotion off your face. Because remember, kids, when you go outside, you gotta wear sunscreen lotion. Did you make a guess? Who'd you pick? If you chose Curious George, you would be right. Curious George is one of my favorite characters of all time. I love how he's always curious and is always getting into things. But he does it because he's curious. He doesn't do it because he wants to get in trouble. He does it because he wants to learn. Just like you, just like me. Don't you want to learn new things every day? So let's get into the original Curious George by H.A. Rey. As I read the book, you might think to yourself, wow, this is really like the movie that I saw once. But also, books and movies sometimes can have different parts. Let's see if you can spot out the different parts, and when we come back to it, we'll talk about it. This is George. He lived in Africa. He was a good little monkey and was always very curious. One day, George saw a man. He had a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home with me. He put his hat on the ground. And, of course, George was curious. He came down from the tree to look at the large yellow hat. Oh man, too bad it's not like my hat. My hat's tan. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to have it on his own head. He picked it up and put it on. The hat covered George's head. He couldn't see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. George was caught. The man with the big yellow hat put George into a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still a little bit curious. Where do you think they're going? On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off his bag. George sat on a little stool, and the man said, George, I'm going to take you to the big zoo in the big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble. George promised to be good, but it's easy for little monkeys to forget. Sounds like me when I was little. I used to tell my parents, oh, I won't do that. And sure enough, I would do it. Sometimes I would even blame my sister. Sorry, Sarah. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally, he had to try. It looked easy, but what do you call a seagull that flies over a bay? A bagel. Oh, what happened? First this, and then this. Where's George? The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water and almost all tired out. Man overboard, the sailor cried. As they threw him a lifebelt, George caught it and held on. At last, he was safe on board. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey until At last, the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship onto the shore and onto the city to the man's house. I got a connection. This is our signal for connection at our school that I do with my kids. When we do this, that means that this book reminds you of something. And this book reminds me of exactly like the movie. This is the point where George and Ted, the man in the yellow hat, get off the boat and they start heading to the museum. After a good meal and a good pipe, George felt very tired. I mean, I would be too, going on a boat and then coming here. I'd be exhausted. He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. Oh, look at his cute little bed. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. Then the man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, what fun! Ding-a-ling-a-ling! George had telephoned the fire station. The firemen rushed to the telephone. Hello? Hello, they answered. But there was no answer. Then they looked for the signals on the big map that showed where the telephone call had come from. They didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. Hurry, hurry, hurry! The firemen jumped onto their fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. Ding dong, ding dong! Everyone out of the way! Hurry, hurry, hurry! You think George is going to get in a lot of trouble when the firemen get to the man in the yellow hat's house and there's no fire? The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. No fire, only a naughty little monkey. Oh, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in the telephone wires. And a thin fireman caught one arm, and a fat fireman caught the other. You fooled the fire department, they said. You'll have to shut you up where you can't do any more harm. They took him away and shut him in a prison. George didn't mean it. He didn't know. He's just some little monkey. George wanted to get out. He climbed up to the windows to try the bars. Just then the watchman came in. He got on the wooden bed to catch George, but he was too big and heavy. The bed tipped over, the watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. Where do you think he's going to go? I think he might go back to the man in the yellow hat's house. He hurried through the building and out on the roof. And then he was lucky to be a monkey. He walked on the telephone wires, quickly and quietly over the guard's head. George walked away. He was free. Down in the street, outside the prison walls, stood a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. He reached over and tried to help himself, but instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose, and in an instant, the wind whisked them all away, and with them went George, holding tight with both hands. Up, up he sailed, higher and higher. The houses looked like toy houses, and the people looked like dolls. George was frightened. He held on very tight. At first, the wind blew in great gusts, and then it quieted. Finally, it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump onto the top of a traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George didn't know what to do. And then he heard someone call, "George!" He looked down and saw his friend, the man in the yellow hat. George was very happy. The man was happy too. George slid down the post, and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arms. Then he paid the balloon man for all the balloons, and then George and the man climbed into the car, and at last away they went. Where do you think they're going? Do you remember where the man with the yellow hat said he wanted to put George? To the zoo. What a nice place for George to live. Boys and girls, as I said earlier, this book was made into a movie. Maybe you've seen the movie. How about right now, have a discussion with mom or dad or brother and sister and think about what was the same or what was different in this book and then in the movie. And then let's talk about it. Leave a comment below. Thank you guys so much for listening to another story read aloud by Mr. Eichley. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like and subscribe button. And until then, keep reading.